Good evening, everybody. Good to be with you on a Wednesday. We are on Facebook only. As I mentioned yesterday, interacting with a hotel Wi-Fi was difficult. We're here in Palm Springs for the Palm Springs Jewish Film Festival, where Guns N' Moses is the closing night gala tomorrow night. So I won't be able to teach the class tomorrow night, but teaching it here on Facebook this evening. And so I didn't have the timer, but that's Moshe Storch that we always listen to during the 2-minute time. We're doing a Hallel, the opening of Hallel from Sukkot, but Hallel is Hallel. Small differences between Rosh Chodesh Hallel and Yom Tov Hallel, beginning of the Hebrew month Hallel, and a festival or holiday Hallel like Sukkot. And that was from the top, right? So from the beginning, Psalm 113 is what he was singing. And, I always like to share that we should not let having total inability to sing stop us from singing. So I put my money where my mouth is there. Okay, we're continuing our journey through chapter 4 of Tractate Menachot, the 30th volume of the Talmud. We opened Mishnah number 5 yesterday. Continuing that, so the idea that, well, if you didn't bring the morning offering when the temple was standing with respect to animal offerings, and we'll talk about the incense offering. So if you didn't bring the morning offering, should you bring the afternoon offering, and vice versa? And in this chapter, we've generally been talking about if you can satisfy some of the elements of a commandment, but not all of them, should you just stop trying to do the commandment, or should you fulfill the parts that can be fulfilled? And of course, the answer to that question depends on the situation and the law in question. Okay, we're picking this up near the top of page 50a. Our daf is 50, page 50, here in Tractate Menachot. The Mishna taught, the Mishnah that we're discussing, Mishnah 5 here in chapter 4, it teaches that if the priests did not sacrifice a lamb in the morning as the daily offering, nevertheless they should sacrifice a lamb in the afternoon as the daily offering. If they did not burn the half measure of incense in the morning, they should burn the half measure in the afternoon. And Rabbi Shimon said, and in such a case, the entire measure was sacrificed in the afternoon, as the daily service on the new golden altar is initiated only with the burning of the incense of the spices in the afternoon, at which time they would burn a full measure. And the Gemara asks, who said anything about the initiation of the temple vessels, i.e., what is the relevance to the Mishnah? Now, this is fascinating, and this is going to open a door that today we're going to be talking about technical laws of the offerings, which are sometimes a little bit challenging to the modern ear in terms of like really digging in and being inspired and fascinated. But I think today, because of the work we put in understanding these laws so far, we're going to find that these technical aspects of the law are fascinating. They absolutely have, meaning to our lives, relevance to our lives, not just studying laws that, were carried out thousands of years ago and haven't been carried out since the temple was destroyed, almost 2,000 years ago, in the year 70 of the Common Era. And here we are at 2026, right? In another 44 years, it would be 2,000 years since we were actually practicing these laws, but we've been studying them nonstop during all this period, almost 2,000 years. And today we're going to learn why it's so important that we have been studying these laws. This is really a wonderful daf today. Okay, so we're arguing on the question, if you didn't sacrifice the morning lamb, are you going to sacrifice the afternoon lamb? And then related, but not the same, there was the daily offerings brought on behalf of the community, animal offerings, morning lamb and afternoon lamb. And there was the morning and afternoon incense offering that was burned on the inner altar, the golden altar in the sanctuary, as opposed to the outer sacrificial altar where animals and libations were brought. The inner altar was just for the incense. And there was a morning offering and an afternoon offering. But it's two separate questions. If you didn't do it in the morning, are you going to do it in the afternoon? And Rabbi Shimon, in explaining that if you didn't burn the morning incense offering in the afternoon, you will burn not only the afternoon incense offering, but the morning's offering as well that you missed. And he doesn't say that about if you missed the morning lamb, are you going to bring 2 lambs in the afternoon? He doesn't say that. But about the ketoris, the incense, he says you do make up the missing measure in the afternoon. And to explain himself, he says, and the reason is because when the incense altar was initiated, right, was inaugurated, was consecrated by its first use, that happened in the afternoon. Okay, well, let's say it happened in the afternoon. How does that answer the question? If you miss the morning incense offering, are you going to burn the afternoon incense offering at all? And if you do, are you going to burn the missing one as well? What difference does it make what happened the very first time the incense altar was initiated? Let us proceed. And so it's wonderful how the Gemara asks that. What difference does it make? It says, who mentioned anything about the initiation of the temple vessels? So the Gemara answers that the Mishnah is incomplete in terms of what relevance to the initiation have to the question of do we do the afternoon offering or not after a missed morning offering. Okay, so says the Gemara, our Mishnah is incomplete. And this is what it is teaching. If they did not sacrifice a lamb for the daily offering in the morning, they should not sacrifice a lamb in the afternoon. In what case is this statement said? It is said in a case where the service of a new altar had not yet been initiated. We have a new altar. So, okay, are we going to initiate it in the morning or are we going to initiate it in the afternoon? Is the question what before us if we have a new altar and we have to start using it, right? So now we're bringing in, well, what is the law, not only for the general case of every day if a morning offering was missed, but what about when we have a new altar? And are we going to say that that's all that our Mishnah is talking about? Really? It's only talking about this situation? Let's see. So in what case is this statement said? It is said in a case where the service of a new altar had not yet been initiated, since it must first be initiated with the daily offering of the morning. But if the service of the altar had already been initiated, then they should sacrifice the lamb of the daily offering in the afternoon, even though they did not sacrifice the lamb of the morning offering. Right? If it had not been initiated, it's an issue because we have to know that this altar should only be initiated in the morning. Wait a minute. Rabbi Shimon said, when does this law apply? It applies at a time when the failure to sacrifice the daily morning offering was because they were prevented from sacrificing it due to circumstances beyond their control, or they failed to sacrifice it unwittingly. But if the priest acted intentionally and did not sacrifice a lamb in the morning, such as the daily offering, they should not sacrifice a lamb in the afternoon as the daily offering. By contrast, If they did not burn the half measure of incense in the morning, they should burn the half measure in the afternoon, regardless of the circumstances. Okay, well, now we've just split issues. The first question was, if we didn't burn in the morning, are we going to burn in the afternoon? To give us an answer for that, we said, well, we have to first deal with the fact that, is it a new altar? And are we going to learn out from the fact that the altar was new once, and when the first offering was made on that altar, was it necessarily in the afternoon? And perhaps we have a new altar and we can't initiate it, we can't inaugurate it now in the morning when we need to burn the morning offering. One possibility of analysis for answering the question, we missed the morning, are we going to do the afternoon? And now Rabbi Shimon is bringing in a whole other basis for analyzing this question, which would be, well, when it wasn't done in the morning, why wasn't it done in the morning? Was it that they lacked the resource to do it? Was it that we had a new altar and we need to inaugurate it? Was it that the priests made a mistake or circumstances beyond their control? A boulder rolled off a mountain and into the area. Some accident happened and they couldn't do it, or they missed it because somebody thought it would. Tom thought that Jim was responsible. Jim thought that Tom was responsible, and so nobody was responsible. And by accident, it didn't happen. Is that going to produce a different result? Then somebody said, you know what? It's my job. I don't feel like doing it today, and he just blew it off. Right? That's an intentional not doing it. So if he intentionally didn't do it in the morning, is that going to produce a different result to the question of, are we going to do it in the afternoon? So let's keep reading. Right, so Rabbi Shimon says, if he did it unwittingly, we're going to bring it in the afternoon. If he did it on purpose not to bring it in the morning, we're not going to bring it in the afternoon. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters? Wait a minute. But let me just read that, what Rabbi Shimon said. But if the priest acted intentionally and did not sacrifice a lamb in the morning as the daily offering, they should not sacrifice a lamb in the afternoon as the daily offering. If he did it on purpose to not bring in the morning, he shouldn't bring in the afternoon. By contrast, if they did not burn the half measure of incense in the morning, even intentionally, nevertheless, they should burn the afternoon incense offering, even if the morning was missed intentionally. So interesting distinction between the animal offering and the incense offering, that if the morning was missed intentionally, we don't do the afternoon in the case of the animal, but if the morning was missed intentionally, we still do it in the afternoon with respect to the incense. Why? Why do we have this distinction between the animal and the incense offerings? The Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived, that if the lamb of the daily offering of the morning was not sacrificed, and the service of a new altar had not yet been initiated, then the lamb of the afternoon is also not sacrificed? How do we know that? Where do we see that in the text of the Torah? And the Gemara explains that it is derived, as the sages taught in a Baraisa. The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the second lamb you shall offer in the afternoon. Exodus 29:39. Note the specific words, right? The one lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the second lamb you shall offer in the afternoon. And this verse teaches that the second lamb of the daily offering is sacrificed in the afternoon. But if it is the first one to be sacrificed, it may not be sacrificed in the afternoon. Right? It says the second one is sacrificed in the afternoon. That means that the only offering that can be offered in the afternoon is a second one. If you didn't do one in the morning, then you don't have a second one to offer in the afternoon. And so you don't offer that afternoon, according to, I think, Rabbi Shimon in this reading. Now, in what case is this statement said? It is said in a case where the service of a new altar had not yet been initiated, since it must first be initiated with the offering of the morning. When the verse refers to the first or second offering, it means the first or second offering ever sacrificed on that altar. That's why we're talking about initiating an altar. This isn't a question the way we answer it in most every other case, all the rest of the days of the life of this altar. It's a different answer on the first day of the life of the altar. But we have to consider what the law is, both in every day of the altar and in the case of the first day of the altar. But if the service of the altar had already been initiated, then even if it is the first to be sacrificed on that day, it should be sacrificed in the afternoon. So it says the second is sacrificed in the afternoon. It doesn't mean the second of the day, and therefore if you miss the morning, you can't do one in the afternoon on all the other days of the life of the altar, only on the first day, right? So the second is in the afternoon. When we say it's only the second that can be sacrificed in the afternoon, we're talking about the second offering of all time on that altar, following its first offering of all time, i.e. when it was initiated for use that morning, that very morning. Rabbi Shimon said Rabbi Shimon said, when does this law apply? It applies at a time when the failure to sacrifice the daily morning offering was because they were prevented from sacrificing it due to circumstances beyond their control, or they failed to sacrifice it unwittingly. But if they acted intentionally and did not sacrifice a lamb in the morning as the daily offering, they should not sacrifice a lamb in the afternoon as the daily offering. But by contrast, if they did not burn the half measure of incense in the morning, they still burn the other half measure in the afternoon, regardless of the circumstances. He brings that same distinction between the Ketores and the animal offering. So the Gemara asks, wait a minute. We're saying that because some priest intentionally missed the morning offering, we're not going to do an afternoon offering? These offerings are communal offerings. They're brought on behalf of the nation. Okay, so some priest made a mistake in the morning and he did it on purpose. Should the nation lose out in the afternoon when it could have had its offering? Now we're going to say it doesn't get it. This is what the Gemara is going to ask. And I like the way that the Gemara asks. It says, does it make sense that because the priest sinned by intentionally failing to sacrifice the morning daily offering, the altar should be entirely idle? Rav has said that this is what Rabbi Shimon is saying. The priests who deliberately failed to sacrifice the morning daily offering should not sacrifice the afternoon daily offering, but other priests should sacrifice it. Now that makes perfect sense, common sense, right? The priest who intentionally didn't bring the communal offering of the morning, well, we're not going to let him bring the afternoon. We're certainly not going to leave it to him to do that. In fact, we're going to preclude him from doing it. He's prohibited from doing it. Some other priest has to bring it in the afternoon, not the priest who intentionally neglected to bring it in the morning. Good law, right? Makes perfect sense. By contrast, however, this was for the animal offering. Now let's go back to the incense offering. By contrast, if the priests acted intentionally and did not burn the incense in the morning, even those same priests may burn it in the afternoon. Why? And the reason for this is that since the burning of the incense is uncommon, it's brought every day, is uncommon, and caused, by contrast, with the incense offering, we're not concerned that this guy who dropped the ball in the morning is going to drop the ball in the afternoon. And what is the reason for that? Two reasons are given: that the ketoret, the incense offering, is uncommon, and number two, the ones who bring it, the priest who brings the incense offering, becomes wealthy, personally wealthy, by doing so. What is the Gemara talking about here? This is absolutely fascinating. Answer: there were many burnt offerings, right? The communal burnt offering of the morning and the afternoon, that lamb that's brought as a burnt offering every day, there's one in the morning, one in the afternoon, it is a type of burnt offering. And although it is a communal burnt offerings were brought all the time in the Holy Temple because individuals could bring burnt offerings. There were many burnt offerings brought in the temple. And so every priest who served in the temple often had the opportunity to be the priest who brings a burnt offering. It wasn't so dear to them, it wasn't so unusual, and they didn't take it as seriously. Now, they probably took every offering completely super seriously, but there is a difference in frequency here. And so the Gemara says, look, the fact is something that they do all the time cannot be as dear to them as something that they did much less often. How less often? Well, the ketoret, the incense offering, there are only 2 a day, period. As the Gemara is going to discuss in the rest of today, it's going to prove that there was no such thing as a voluntary incense offering. The incense offering in the Holy Temple was only brought obligatorily. right? It was a communal obligation, and there was no such thing as a voluntary incense offering. There was no incense offering of an individual, and there wasn't even a voluntary incense offering of the community. The incense offering was only brought as an obligation morning and afternoon in the Holy Temple on behalf of the community. Those were the only opportunities that ever existed to bring the incense offering. And since there were much fewer incense offerings than burnt offerings, there's much fewer opportunities for priests to be the priest who brings that day's morning or afternoon incense offering. So how often did a priest who served in the temple, a typical Kohen, right, a typical priest, a descendant of Aaron, let's say in the first temple period, and the priest would serve 2 weeks a year, right? As we've learned that there were watches of priests, families that would serve together, and they would go to Jerusalem and live in or around the temple for a week at a time in the temple, and serve for a week at a time, and then they would do that twice a year, right? 2 watches. And plus, I think they would all serve on Passover and Sukkot when they needed all the priests, all hands on board, because the whole nation was there. But generally 2 weeks a year. So how often, in a time when, by the time we're in the first temple period, there's thousands of Kohanim. How often does any particular Kohen get to do the incense offering? Once. Once in his whole life. Much different than being the priest that brings any particular burnt offering, even a communal burnt offering, because there were so many burnt offerings that they brought. But every priest only got it to do it once in his life, that he brings the Ketores. And there was a spiritual teaching, as we're just learning now, that it was, such a high obligation on behalf of the community that the one who brought it, it made him wealthy. Now, it's not like they literally gave him a bunch of cash because he brought it that day, but it was considered something that was spiritually so significant and such a service to the whole nation that if it was brought presumably with sanctity, with intentionality, with holiness, with love, that he's doing this on behalf of the whole nation, it elevated him to such a degree that it would attract prosperity to him. And so given that it was so holy, so rare, and so rewarding for any particular priest to bring the incense offering, who would miss such an opportunity? If he missed it in the morning, it must have been unwitting, right? He couldn't have chosen, he just said, no, I don't feel like it. I won't bother. I don't believe in it. Something must have gone wrong, and that's why, with respect to the Ketores, to the incense offering, we let him bring it in the afternoon, even though he missed the morning. Now, this is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. There's this association with doing the service on behalf of the nation, and it elevates a person so much that it attracts prosperity to them, because we haven't done this for over 2,000 years, right? Or almost 2,000 years. But what we have done is study the incense offering. In fact, every day that a Jew prays from a prayer book, he opens the service. Most people, just read past it in a hurry. But we learn the laws every day in the prayer book of what was the components, the 11 components. If you saw my video from Israel, you'll see why there's 11 components, even though the Torah lists 4, of what are the components of the incense. We study them because that's how we keep the fire burning and the sweet scent rising for the nation of Israel when we don't have the temple. We study the laws that we cannot fulfill, and that's considered fulfilling them, right? So you had to be a Kohen to burn the incense in the temple, but you don't have to be a Kohen to study the laws of the Kohanim and bringing the incense. It is an essential service that you do for Israel. We are standing our post right now on behalf of the nation of Israel. And I don't mean the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel. I mean the B'nai Yisrael, all of us, the nation of Israel, the children of Israel, Israel collectively. For Israel collectively to be acting in a righteous, holy manner, there has to be a core of people studying these laws in place of the Kohanim actually performing them. If ever we lost all the Torah scholars, God forbid, and these laws weren't being studied by a core group of people, I shudder to think what would happen to the world. The world might not stand. And so right now we're doing an essential service to Am Yisrael, to the Bnei Yisrael everywhere by studying these laws. And now perhaps the next time we encounter that list of ingredients of the Ketores in the prayer book in the morning, be like, oh, this is so important. This is so important for the nation of Israel. I'm standing my post. And it might even attract prosperity. I'm not saying that. I'm just observing that there seems to be a linkage in what we've just learned. It's kind of amazing. Okay, let's go. Told you today was cool, right? The sun is going down behind me. You can see that this window faces west here in Palm Springs. For those who are tuning in late, where we're here because for the Guns N' Moses closing night gala, the Palm Springs Jewish Film Festival tomorrow night. Okay. Okay, so just to say it again, by contrast, if the priest acted intentionally and did not burn the incense in the morning, even those same priests may burn it in the afternoon. And the reason for this is that since the burning of the incense is uncommon and causes those who do so to become wealthy, it is dear to the priests, and they will not be negligent in the performance of this rite. Next topic. The Mishna teaches that if they did not burn the half measure of the incense in the morning, they should burn the half measure in the afternoon. And Rabbi Shimon said, and in such a case, the entire measure was sacrificed in the afternoon. And the reason for the difference between the daily offerings and the incense is that the daily service on a new golden altar is initiated only with the burning of the incense of the spices of the afternoon, at which time they would burn a full measure. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it Torah Baraisa that the service of a new golden altar is initiated with the burning of the incense of the spices of the morning? So we have two teachings that are 100% contradictory about when they had a new golden altar. There was the original golden altar in the wilderness that was stood inside the tent of meeting where they burned the incense every day. And then eventually the service was moved to a more permanent tabernacle in Shiloh. And eventually the service was moved to a structure, a building instead of a tent in the first temple built by Solomon in Jerusalem, right? So at some point along that long span of years, 800 years, until the end of the first temple period, let's say, the golden altar might have broken down. The one that they built in Moses' time might have needed to be replaced. So when there was the original golden altar and a new golden altar later, with which service did we start its use? When was its first of the continuing daily use? When do we start it? In the morning or in the afternoon? We have two contradictory answers in the tradition. Abaye said it stands to reason that the law should be in accordance with the one who says that it was initiated with the incense of the spices of the afternoon. As it is written with regard to the golden altar, and Aaron shall burn thereon incense of sweet spices every morning when he dresses the lamps, he shall burn it. And when Aaron lights the lamps at dusk, he shall burn it. A perpetual incense before the Lord throughout your generations. So a perpetual incense before the Lord throughout your generations is closest in proximity within that verse to the burning of the afternoon. So maybe it's when you're talking about starting something perpetual, the initiation, you start it in the afternoon. That's Abaye's argument. The fact that ashes are removed from the lamps of the menorah in the morning indicates that the lamps had been lit previously. It's almost like, wait a minute, we were just talking about the incense altar. Why are we now talking about the menorah? Let's just keep reading. The fact that ashes are removed from the lamps of the menorah in the morning indicates that the lamps had been lit previously, since if the priest had not performed the lighting of the lamps the previous evening, from where would the ashes be removed in the morning? So that suggests that the very first lighting happened in the afternoon, so that the very first morning that there was a morning with a menorah in it, they were already sweeping out ashes, right? So that means it was initiated with the evening lighting. This proves that the menorah must have been lit for the first time in the evening, since the verse states, when Aaron lights the lamps at dusk, he shall burn it, a perpetual incense before the Lord. It must be that the incense was burned for the first time in the evening. And the Gemara asks, okay, that's Abaye's argument. And according to the one who says that the service of the new golden altar, the incense altar, is initiated with the burning of the incense of the spices in the morning, how did you derive it? Abaye gave his argument based on Torah of why it should start in the evening. So this view that it says we start the service of a golden altar in the morning, where you derive that from, challenges the Gemara. And the Gemara answers, he derives it from the initiation of the altar of the burnt offering, right? The external altar. If we look at the menorah, which provides light, perhaps we can get an answer about the incense altar, which provides this pleasing aroma to the Lord, right? The incense aroma. And maybe burning incense is like lighting the wicks of a menorah. But now the other view is saying, no, it's still a sacrificial altar, so let's look at the other sacrificial altar, the external altar where animals are brought. So he derives it from the initiation of the external altar of burnt offerings. And just as there, the service of the new altar of burnt offering is initiated by means of the daily offerings, so it starts in the morning. The first time an offering is brought on the external altar, it's the morning offering of a day. You initiate the external altar with a morning offering. And so since the incense altar is a sacrificial altar after all, we should learn out from the external animal sacrificial altar that the inner incense altar also is initiated with a morning offering, namely the morning incense offering. Says the Mishnah, and that's where that argument leaves off, So it sounds like we don't know. There are two conflicting views about which is the first offering of a golden incense altar. Now the Mishnah teaches, so we're back to our Mishnah here, Mishnah 5, and use of a new table. What table? This is the table in the sanctuary that held the showbreads, the 12 loaves of bread that were replaced every Shabbos. How is that relevant? Well, there was always a first day of the table of the showbreads. What do we do on that first day? When do we start putting those loaves on? When do we initiate its service? And the use of the new table was initiated only with the arrangement of the showbread on Shabbos. It get changed out every Shabbos. So the first time you put showbreads on that table is going to be Shabbos. And the Gemara asks, but does the Mishnah mean to indicate that if the showbread was placed on the table on a weekday, it is merely that the use of a new table is not initiated, but the showbread is sanctified? And the law is that the showbread is sanctified only when it is placed on the table on Shabbos. It has to be placed on the table on Shabbos, or if you put bread on that table when it's not Shabbos, that bread is not consecrated as the showbread. It's just bread on a table. For it to be the showbread, it has to be introduced as the showbread on Shabbos onto that table. Now the Gemara answers, the Mishnah teaches us this law itself, that the initiation of the use of a new table and the sanctification of the showbread when it is placed on the table occur only on Shabbos. The first time it has to be done on Shabbos, and from then on it can only be done on Shabbos. We don't change the breads on any other day. This is, as the Mishnah teaches in the latter clause, with regard to the initiation of a menorah. And use of a new menorah was initiated only with the kindling of its 7 lamps in the afternoon. New menorah had to be initiated when this important thing happened, its evening lighting, and a new table of showbreads had to be initiated when its important thing is happening, namely the placement of showbreads on Shabbos, so it had to be initiated for the first time on Shabbos. Now the Gemara cites another law relating to the burning of the incense. The sages taught in a baraisa, this is incense that was offered for an individual rather than the community on the external altar, and not the golden altar as usual. And this was a provisional edict. Wait. Didn't I tell you earlier that the incense was only ever offered obligatorily and by the community? There's no individual offerings of incense. And it only happened on the golden altar. So what are we talking about here? That there was an individual incense offering on the outer altar, the external altar. What are we talking about? It was a one-time deal, happened only once, and it's only going to be once. Right? And what was that? Have you guessed already? I'm just going to read. The sages taught in baraisa, this is the incense that was offered for an individual rather than the community on the external altar, and not the golden altar as usual. And this was a provisional edict, permitted temporarily for one time only. And the Gemara clarifies, to what case is the Baraisa referring? And Rav Papa said it is referring to the incense brought by the tribal princes at the inauguration of the tabernacle, the first time the Jewish people erected the tabernacle in history. The only time that the tabernacle was initiated for the first time. The first incense altar, the first menorah, the first outer altar, external altar, had incense burned on it. The external altar had incense burned on it. Why? Because they inaugurated the whole tabernacle with a 12-day inauguration. Each day, a prince of one of the tribes of Israel brought a set of vessels to be used in the Holy Temple. Vessels for capturing the blood of animal offerings, vessels for containing the flour of meal offerings and for baking the breads and, matzahs and unleavened breads that are brought with offerings, vessels like the show table, the inner altar, the outer altar. All of that got initiated for the first time during that 12-day inauguration in the wilderness, when each prince on behalf of his tribe brought a complete set of vessels. So there were 12 complete sets of vessels for the Holy Temple. And during that inauguration, each prince brought incense, and some of that incense was burned on the outer altar. But that did not become a precedent for individual offerings of incense in later generations. It was one time only. The Gemara asks, but with regard to the incense of an individual, is it only on the external altar that it is not generally permitted to be burned, but an individual may sacrifice incense on the inner altar, as indicated by this Baraisa? And furthermore, on the external altar, is it only an individual who may not sacrifice incense, but the community may sacrifice incense on the external altar as a voluntary offering? I told you that that's not allowed, but how do we know that? This is when the sages worked it out. But isn't it taught in a Baraisa contrary to those two inferences? One might have thought that an individual may voluntarily donate and bring incense similar to the incense brought by the tribal princes to the temple as a gift offering. And I will read with regard to this incense, as in the case of other gift offerings, that which has gone out of your lips you shall observe and do. Deuteronomy 23:24. Therefore, the verse states concerning the inner altar, you shall bring no strange incense thereon. Exodus 30, verse 9. This is what Aaron's older sons, Nadav and Avihu, broke, right? They violated this prohibition. They brought strange incense on that altar and they died for it. What is strange incense? Incense that wasn't commanded by the Lord. Right? This indicates that an individual may not sacrifice incense even on the inner altar. There are no individual offerings of incense. One might have thought that only an individual may not bring a gift of incense on the inner altar, as an individual does not bring his obligatory offering similar to this gift of incense, i.e., since an individual is never obligated to sacrifice incense, he may not voluntarily sacrifice incense either. Right? But a community, you might have thought an individual can never bring a voluntary incense offering, but a community may bring incense as a gift offering, as the community does bring its obligatory offering similar to this. Right? There are incense offerings, they are communal offerings, they're obligatory communal offerings, but perhaps using that as a precedent, the community could bring a voluntary incense offering, a voluntary gift offering of incense. Maybe it could do that. Therefore, the verse states, you shall not bring strange incense thereon, lo ta'alu, and the fact that the verse formulates the prohibition with the plural word ta'alu, all of you may not bring, indicates that even the community may not sacrifice incense as a voluntary gift offering. There are no voluntary gift offerings of incense. It is only community and obligatory. We're on page 50b. And the Baraisa continues, one might have thought that the community may not bring a gift offering of incense on the inner altar, but it may bring incense on the external altar. And therefore the verse states, in the anointing oil and the incense of sweet spices for the sacred place, according to all that I've commanded you, you shall they do. This teaches that one has the right to do only that which is stated with regard to the matter without deviation. Consequently, incense may be sacrificed only by the community, only when there is an obligation to sacrifice it, and it must be burned only on the inner altar. And this contradicts the implication of the previously cited Baraisa that it is permitted to burn the incense of an individual on the golden altar or the incense of a community on the outer altar. No, we may not. Only obligatory, community, and on the inner altar. Rav Papa said, this is not problematic. The Baraisa is speaking, utilizing the style of, it is not necessary, as follows. It is not necessary to state that the community may not sacrifice incense on the external altar, as we have not found a precedent for it. And similarly, it is not necessary to state that an individual may not sacrifice incense on the inner altar, as we have not found a precedent for that. But it is necessary to state that it is even prohibited for an individual to sacrifice incense on the external altar, despite the fact that we have found a precedent for it, right? That the princes did it at their very first inauguration, in the sense that individuals brought, Ketores on behalf of their tribe, and it was sacrificed on the outer altar, but that was a one-time thing. It does not serve as a precedent, and so it needed to be stated that it may not be done on the outer altar. Incense, never voluntary, never individual, never on the outer altar. We now got all those rules. Okay, and that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 4. We move on to Mishnah 6. The 12 loaves of matzah, unleavened bread, prepared from 1/10 of an ephah of flour of the griddle cake offering of the high priest, which was a daily offering, did not come from the house of the high priest in halves. Rather, the high priest brings from his house a complete 1/10 of an ephah of flour, and he divides it in half. And he sacrifices half in the morning and half in the afternoon. It's as if you said, just to make it easier to understand, right? That you have to sacrifice an egg in the morning and an egg in the afternoon. That's not the law, but just to keep it simpler. Let's say it said you have to sacrifice an egg in the morning, you have to sacrifice an egg in the afternoon. Okay, so you bring out an egg in the morning, you bring out an egg in the afternoon. But that's not the way it's done. It says that there's a complete portion, which is, let's say, 2 eggs for this example, that needs to be sacrificed every day. So you bring out 2 eggs together, and then you sacrifice one of those eggs in the morning and one in the afternoon. And if in between that presentation of the 2 together and then the sacrifice of the first one, and then you lost the second one, as we shall see, then you can't just bring a replacement for it in the afternoon. You're going to have to deal with the fact that the thing that was presented complete and half of it was sacrificed, its other half was lost. It's not eggs. It's definitely not eggs. What is it? It's a certain measure of flour, of wheat flour. How much? 1/10 of an ephah. How is it presented as a daily offering of the high priest in these 12, loaves of matzah, 12 loaves of matzah. Okay, so in the case of a high priest who brings and sacrifices half in the morning, right? He presents the whole thing, the 1/10 of an ephah, and then he takes half of that and he brings it as an offering on the outer altar in the morning, and then he dies. So he presented the full, and then he presented half of it onto the altar, and brought half on the altar, and then he dies. So now we have this other half that he can't bring in the afternoon because he's dead. So in the case of a high priest who brings and sacrifices half in the morning and then he dies, and they appointed another high priest in his stead, the replacement high priest should neither bring half of 1/10 of an ephah of flour from his house, nor sacrifice the remaining half of the 1/10 of an ephah of his predecessor. Rather, he brings from his house an entire 1/10 of an ephah, and he divides it in half, and he sacrifices half for the afternoon offering, and then that other half of his is not sacrificed, rather it is lost. So there's going to be the unburnt half from the morning, that's going to be lost, and there's going to be the unburnt half of the afternoon offering of this new priest. Those 2 are lost, but there was a half of the morning complete presentation that was sacrificed in the morning, and there's a half of the afternoon's complete presentation by the new high priest that gets sacrificed on the altar. So the nation is covered, but because a priest died after the morning offering, there are going to be 2 halves of those presented whole 1/10s of ephah that are lost. And we'll see what the Gemara means when it says it is lost. Consequently, 2 halves of a tenth of an ephah are sacrificed, and 1 half of what was brought by each priest, and the other 2 halves are lost. That's Mishnah 6. Now the Gemara. The Gemara cites that which the sages taught in a Baraisa, commenting on the verse, "This is the offering of Aaron and of his sons, which they shall offer to the Lord on the day when he is anointed. The 10th part of an ephah of fine flour for a meal offering perpetually, half of it in the morning and half of it in the evening." Leviticus 6:13. If the verse had stated a meal offering perpetually, half in the morning, half in the evening, I would have said that the high priest brings half of a tenth in the morning and he sacrifices it, and then he brings half a tenth in the afternoon and he sacrifices it. But the verse states half of it in the morning and half of it in the evening. So it teaches that he sacrifices half of a complete ephah. How so? It means that the high priest brings from his house a complete tenth of fine flour, tenth of an ephah of fine flour in the morning. He divides it in half, and then he sacrifices half in the morning and half in the afternoon. The net effect is the same. A half of a tenth of an ephah is brought as a sacrifice in the morning, and a half of a tenth of an ephah is brought as a sacrifice in the afternoon. But those 2 halves have to come out of the house of the Kohen Gadol together in the morning. And the reason that matters is because if something happens to the second half or to the priest before the second half is sacrificed, we're going to have to address that because it needed to come out as a complete thing, and then half of that in the morning and half of that in the afternoon. So in a case where half of a tenth of an ephah, Right. So in a case where the half of a tenth of an ephah that was supposed to be offered in the afternoon became impure, or it was lost after the high priest sacrificed the first half in the morning, right? So this is in a case where the second half itself, something happened to it, either became unusable or it was lost. So one might have thought that he should bring half a tenth of an ephah from his house and sacrifice it. So you lost the second half, so you replace it. You bring the equivalent amount of flour, it's basically just bread. So you bring the equivalent amount of bread to replace that which you lost and sacrifice that in the afternoon. You might have thought that would work. It doesn't work because you have to bring out a complete presentation in the morning. So if you lose or damage that second half, what's going to happen? Therefore, the verse states half of it in the morning, half of it in the evening, which teaches that he brings half of a complete tenth of an ephah. How so? So if he lost or damaged that second half, what does he do? The high priest brings a complete tenth of an ephah of fine flour from his house, and he divides it in half. And he sacrifices half, and the other half is not sacrificed and is lost. Right? So if the second half is lost or damaged, you have to bring out another complete tenth of an ephah, sacrifice half of it, and then there's going to be a half that is unused, even though there's nothing wrong with it. Right? It's not damaged or lost like the second half of the morning's complete show, complete presentation. Now you have the second half of the afternoon, but you can't bring it on the altar because you already used the first half of this second new complete tenth. So there's going to be something lost, right? It's going to be something lost. There's the lost or damaged second half of the morning offer of the morning presentation, and now there's going to be the one you're going to have to get rid of without burning on the altar. It's not lost or damaged, but it cannot be used in the afternoon. In that sense, there's going to be 2 halves that are lost. So in the case of a high priest who sacrificed half in the morning and then he died, and they appointed another high priest in his stead, one might have thought that the second high priest should bring half of a tenth of an ephah from his house and sacrifice it, or that he should sacrifice the remaining half of a tenth of an ephah from the first high priest who died before he could offer that. So therefore the verse states, and half of it in the evening, which teaches that this new high priest brings and sacrifices half of a complete tenth, which is the complete tenth, the new complete tenth that the new high priest brings in the afternoon. Now, with regard to the 2 halves of a tenth of an ephah that are lost, right? Either because the priest died and couldn't do his second half, and then the extra second half from the new high priest, or the one that was just literally lost or damaged before it could be offered in the afternoon. And so that same high priest has to bring a new complete tenth of an ephah, bring half of that on the altar, and then there's this extra half that he doesn't bring. So what do we do with these extra halves? So with regard to the two halves of the tenth of an ephah that are lost, a Tana, i.e. the sage recited Baraisas, right? A teacher who helped the sages remember exactly how these teachings were worded, taught a Baraisa before Rav Nachman. With regard to the half that was not sacrificed by the first high priest who died, and the half brought but not sacrificed by the second high priest who replaced him, what do we do with those halves that we can't use? Their form should decay, i.e. they should be left overnight, so they become disqualified. Again, it's not that they get rotten or stale, it's just that they're left beyond their time, and then they cannot be used because there's a deadline for bringing these offerings from when they're sort of initiated until they have to be, from when they're consecrated until they have to be offered on the altar. And if you miss the deadline, they can no longer be brought on the altar. They're still holy things, so you have to dispose of them in a respectful and very specific way. And what is that way? As we're learning. You let them become disqualified overnight, and then they should be brought out to the place designated for burning. Not the altar, where you're offering sacrifices, but the place of burning for disqualified offerings that need to be burned, but burnt in a respectful manner. That's called the place of burning. Rav Nachman said to the Tana, granted, the half that was not sacrificed by the first high priest needs to be left overnight and to be disqualified and burnt in the place of burning, because it was initially fit for sacrifice before the first high priest died. But with regard to the half that was not sacrificed by the second high priest, why must it be left overnight so that its form decays? Why does it need to be disqualified? It was brought to be lost from the outset. We knew that there was going to be an extra half, right? When the second high priest brings his complete tenth of an ephah, we know half of it is going to go on the altar and half won't, right? So why does it have to be, left overnight to be disqualified? We knew it was going to be destined for the place of burning, so why wait overnight until it's disqualified? It should be auto-disqualified since it was never meant to be qualified. It was just that extra second half because we had to bring a complete tenth of an ephah from which to take the half that is burned on the altar. That's the question. But with regard to the half that was not sacrificed by the second priest, why must it be left overnight? It was brought from the outset to be lost. I.e., when the full tenth of an ephah was brought, it was known that only half would be sacrificed and half would be lost. Consequently, it is unnecessary to leave it overnight before burning it in the place of burning. And Rav Nachman continued, who is the one who said this baraisa to you? It was the Tana of the school of Rav bar Avu, who said all disqualified offerings, even pigul, which is disqualified by Torah law, require decay of form before they are burned. Yeah, okay, we knew that we were going to burn half of it, but out of respect to it, since it did become sanctified in the Holy Temple, we wait until it's literally disqualified before we sadly commit it to burning in a way that is not a sacrificial, sanctified burning, but just a respectful disposal of something that had a chance to go to the altar and didn't make it. Rav Ashi said the baraisa can be understood even if you say it is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rav bar Avu and hold that pigul does not require decay of form. Nevertheless, since at the time when the second high priest divides the two halves, if he wants, he can sacrifice this half, and if he wants, he can sacrifice that other half. Both halves are considered fit to be sacrificed, and may not be burned until they are left overnight. Like I said, it had a chance, right? It was part of a complete tenth of an ephah, and randomly, it wasn't the half chosen to be burned on the altar, but it stood at one time that it could be. And so we're out of respect to it, we allow it to extend past its deadline before we respectfully burn it in the place of burning. And if we're going to be so careful with the kavod, right, with the the respectability and the honor given to inanimate objects, even if we're talking about ketoris and meal offerings, they're after all inanimate objects, how much more must we be very careful of the honor of a human being, who is sensitive and has feelings? How much more do we have to be sensitive to the honor of a person? Okay, last topic. We're almost at the end of today's daf, and then we'll take some questions and comments. Get that ready. Okay, the Gemara cites that which was stated further about the griddle cake offering. How are the griddle cake offerings of the high priest prepared? The verse seems to prescribe a variety of methods of preparation. On a griddle, it shall be made with oil. When it is soaked, you shall bring it in, and baked pieces of the meal offering you shall sacrifice for a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And Rabbi Chiya bar Abba says, that Rabbi Yochanan says that it is prepared in the following manner. The individual preparing it bakes it in an oven, and afterward he fries it in a pan. And Rabbi Asi says that Rabbi Hanina says that it is prepared in a different way. He says that the individual preparing it fries it in a pan, and afterwards he bakes it in an oven. Rabbi Chiya bar Abba said it stands to reason according to my opinion because the verse states, and baked pieces of the meal offering, and the word for baked pieces, tufine, should be understood as meaning that they shall be baked when they are still beautiful, te'afenana, before being fried. So Rabbi Asi said it stands to reason according to my opinion because the word tufine should be understood as meaning that they shall be baked when they are already partially cooked, te'afenana, i.e. after being fried. And the dispute between the Amoraim, these sages of the Gemara, is parallel to a dispute between the Tanaim, the sages of the Mishna in a Baraisa. The word for baked pieces, tufine, should be understood as meaning that they shall be baked when they are already partially cooked, te'afenana. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe, says it should be understood as meaning that they shall be baked when they are still beautiful. And Rabbi Yosei says the word tufine is a plural word indicating that the pieces should be baked extensively, i.e. more than once. Consequently, Rabbi Yosei accepts the opinion that the pieces should be baked when they are already partially cooked, and he also accepts the opinion that they shall be baked when they are beautiful. Therefore, the offering should be baked first, then fried, and then baked again. And that's how we satisfy all opinions and come to a beautifully prepared meal offering daily brought by the high priest when the temple is standing in Jerusalem. Okay, that's what we got for today. And, am I going to be able to see these questions? I have to log back into the hotel Wi-Fi. Come on. I'm going to give this another minute. The computer was on the whole time. Okay, hold on. Logging back in to the internet. Sorry about this. Yes, I have to join. Continue to internet. Okay. Okay, here we go. Lucy, I am confused about the new altar. Was there more than one altar on which offerings were made in the temple? No, but you probably asked that before the assumption that I made, which was eventually the altar wore out and needed to be replaced. That's why it's possible that there was an initiation at a later time. There's certainly, we know that the altar that they carried about in the wilderness was replaced. The external altar was definitely replaced. Even when they settled in Shiloh, there was a more permanent altar than the one they carried around in the wilderness. And then certainly that altar was replaced by the permanent structure that was built by Solomon at the time of the building of the first temple. So there were new altars in history, but it was certainly rare compared to all the other days that each altar was used during that lifetime of that altar. Sharon, I must admit, I kind of read the Pitom section of the prayer service kind of half-heartedly. I guess I will pay better attention moving forward. You and me both, right? Is that awesome? That when we, let's not skim over the elements of the Ketoris, of the incense that we read in the morning and evening prayers, in the prayer book. I mean, I know it's there. I kind of sometimes occasionally skim it, often skip it if I'm honest. In the morning offering, in the morning prayers, and is it the evening prayers or is it the afternoon? I think it's actually the afternoon. Yeah, the Ketorah service I think is written at the beginning of Mincha, of the afternoon service, because it was an afternoon offering, right? Not an evening offering. There was the lamps of the menorah are lit at night, and we read about that in the evening. Okay, Lucy, I think I get it. The Gemara is doing origin stories, talking about the first time the altar or the table or the menorah was initiated way back. Okay, very good. You answered your own question. That's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, we'll be together again Saturday. No class tomorrow, Thursday. Our film playing here in Palm Springs Jewish Film Festival. No class Friday, transit day. Just not going to work out. Fridays are tough anytime because of Shabbos. So our next class is Motzi Shabbos, and with God's help, I'll be back at home with the regular equipment on YouTube and Facebook with the counter timer at the beginning. God willing, we'll see it when it happens with God's help. So until then, I wish you, my friends, good Shabbos. May we go into Shabbos hearing only good news. There's a lot going on in the world, and so please join me praying for the safety of all Israel. Missiles are raining, and for the safety of all innocent Persians who are welcoming this attack because it's a chance to get their country back. I mean, I'm not kidding. People who doubt me, just look online. Persians in Iran and out of Iran everywhere are celebrating this attack because it's the only chance that they've had in 47 years to get their country back from the radical terrorist, jihadist terrorists that colonized Iran. So let's pray that they get their country back. And in the meantime, for the safety of everyone in harm's way, I mean, Iran is just spitting out missiles in every direction. There was a really heavy barrage from Hezbollah, which is a proxy of Iran, into northern Israel today, more than Iron Dome could deal with. There were, I think, 100 missiles and 50 got through. And last I heard, there were 5 injuries and no deaths from 50 missiles that got into northern Israel. So thank you, God, for that miracle. And let us say amen. And please, God, keep sending the miracles. May this war end soon, speedily, and with a lasting and secure peace for Israel and all her neighbors. And let us say amen.